Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome back to my favourite time of the week. I'm very lucky to have an old friend of mine, Colonel Tim Wilson, who after a very successful army career went out into business and is now the CEO of MSI Global Alliance, which is an alliance of companies that are accounting firms and law firms. So Tim, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah.
So what should we talk about? How about inspiring leadership and who's inspired you?
Yeah. I think the first person who really inspired me was someone called General Sam Cowan.
Oh yeah.
Who I was lucky enough to be his military assistant, so I was sort of probably early 30s at the time, and he came in to this particular role with a bit of a whirlwind actually. He was a very, very original thinker. He really challenged the status quo. He challenged orthodoxy. He challenged people who were a bit comfortable in their views, and it was very inspiring to watch him try to change a culture, really, in many ways, in the organisation that he was running.
He was a force of nature.
Yeah, he was. He was very, very impressive.
And for what was always the sort of the uncool part of the army compared to the cavalry and the infantry in the Royal Signals, which I was in for half my career.
Yeah,
he was a legend.
Yeah,
because not only did he do the communication side well, but he then went into the mainstream generalship and leadership and made a huge difference.
Yeah, he did absolutely. And then subsequent to that, I was lucky enough to work for General Mike Jackson, who after he at the time he was running a division in Bosnia. It was the first NATO deployment in Bosnia, and I was his operations officer effectively.
Big job.
And great job. But he was someone who had huge moral courage and strength, and was also massively charismatic, and one could see that in his negotiations with the former fighting parties, really, in former Yugoslavia.
He didn't take any prisoners.
He didn't take any prisoners at all, but he was also someone who he was fun to work for.
Right.
One was happy to work ridiculously long hours.
Yeah, you probably put in incredible hours.
Oh, sort of. Yeah, 18, 19, 20 hours a day, so it was pretty normal. But one was happy to do it for him, and he was prepared to congratulate you on decent work.
That's important.
But he created a very good
that,
culture, a very good culture to work in. Actually.
But just staying with that one, appreciating the work people do.
Correct.
Really important, and some take you for granted.
They do,
and just go, well, look, we pay you, so just get on and do it. And this is in business as well. That's a problem. But I think never underestimate the power of authentic appreciation.
Correct. Absolutely right.
Good.
Absolutely right.
Okay, and there's a number of others that we'll talk about in our Inspiring Leadership Extra session later on. But then you were, as one of your many exciting roles, as well as being sort of military assistants to generals and things, you were commanding officer of your own regiment, the Cowan Dragoon Guard. So the thing that everybody wants to command their own regiment. And that had some good learnings. I mean, I understand you went to Iraq.
Correct. Yeah.
With a tank regiment, which is fascinating. What was the highlight of that tour, and then what was the learning that you had about how you could have got it better? Learning from your mistakes.
Yeah. I suppose the highlight was commanding your own regiment on operations, and that's a sort of dream that everyone always has when you're a sort of young officer.
Was it pretty hairy at times?
It was quite hairy at times. It was not the most demanding of tours when I compare it to some other people's tours. Certainly the tour just 6 months before us had been really, really tough. And we were lucky to come back with everyone, which was fantastic. And I know that my regiment went back about a year or so later, and unfortunately lost a number of people killed, which was really tragic. But when I look back at how one could have done something better, I think that probably my approach at that time was much more sort of directed, element of command and control. I suppose to a certain extent you're driven down that because you are on operations.
Because your intention behind doing that was what?
Was to ensure that things were done as efficiently, as effectively as possible. But I think you make a very good point there, because actually what that instinctively demonstrates is perhaps it was a lack of trust that I had.
Yeah.
And I think that even in an operational environment, I think you can still approach life in a more collegiate way and trust people a little bit more. So if I look back, that's perhaps what I would have done differently.
Yeah, and this brings up the very powerful differentiation between in business. A number of leaders like to have, they're perfectionists and they like to control everything and be down in the boiler room.
Yeah.
When actually they need to be up on the balcony of the Titanic, seeing the iceberg 3 miles out and going, 1 degree left, okay, everything else all right, carry on, and that stops a disaster. But when they're down in the boiler room, they'll never spot the iceberg.
Exactly.
And they're doing someone's job.
Correct. And I think it's interesting. I mean, the Wellington, when Wellington became Prime Minister, and you probably know this quote,
tell me the story,
that when he became Prime Minister, he wrote to a relative of his, and he said, "I had my first cabinet meeting today. Extraordinary affair. I gave them their orders, and they stayed and wanted to discuss it." And I think that demonstrates the sort of the contrast, if you like, between the military and the civilian life. But it was interesting, because I think that even post command, I saw some very successful senior officers who had really taken this collegiate approach, to its extreme in a way, and were very effective as a result of that. Yeah. I saw others who continued this command and control and this directed element, and actually in some cases they'd gone to the extreme and became sort of bullies. I know that that's been mentioned in some of your podcasts before. Yeah. And that becomes a very unpleasant environment to be in. Yeah. But I think certainly, having gone into the civilian world, a lot of this logged. Yeah. And I realised that one's got to be collegiate. Well, particularly get people on side.
Particularly in MSI Global Alliance, where you've got to influence. You don't have the power. You've got to influence these different firms who are going to refer business to each other around the world, and you've got to ask them, encourage them, cajole them to collaborate with each other. And you can't do. So what you're doing now is the other aspect of what they talk about. Rather than command and control, you're doing environmental control, where you're creating an environment where people flourish and help each other and have this collegiate approach.
Yeah, totally.
Our last minute. What would be your top tip that you would give people? A top leadership tip to take away.
I think collaboration is probably number one. I think that whatever decisions you feel you want to bring about, I think you need to collaborate, you need to socialise. I used to hate that word when I was in the army, but I think it's a really powerful word. Socialise an idea, get buy-in. Yeah. I think once you've then got the buy-in, you can then frame a vision, frame a strategy, frame an idea. And then you need to be able to explain that, confidently, and back it up, but give people a very, very clear idea of where you want the organisation to go. I think you then need to obviously sort of check that everyone is continuing to buy into that and refresh, if you like, as well. Yeah. And then I suppose the third one is to keep innovating. It comes back to General Sam Cowan. Challenge the status quo, see how you can do things differently, and bring about change if it's appropriate.
Tim, that's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure. Congratulations on your role. And,
thank you, Johnny.
And a very successful military career.
Thanks a lot.